Hello, I'm Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Strecher, and we're discussing his book, Life on Purpose. Welcome to Rip Rap.
Thank you very much.
I found this book really interesting, but I think it has its backstory, and it might be helpful to talk about that first.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I have never written a book for the public before like this. I had written a few years ago a graphic novel, and I decided to work with a DC Dark Horse comic book illustrator to write that. It's called On Purpose. But after then giving many talks about that book and my own experiences related to purpose in life and my own scientific research, I got a call from the editor at HarperOne, a subsidiary of HarperCollins, and he asked whether I would consider writing maybe a quote real book for this with words, and so I started thinking about that more. The inception of it came when my daughter Julia passed away 5 years ago, and she was born healthy, and she caught a virus when she was 6 months old. I was on sabbatical with the family in Holland, and all sabbatical means is it's a research leave where I was doing research with people in the Netherlands, and our 6-month-old started shrinking, actually losing weight rather than gaining weight, and so we brought her into the hospital there, and after going to doctors many times, and they didn't know what was going on really, finally we took her to the hospital, and after a few days they found that her heart was completely destroyed, that chickenpox virus that she had caught, which normally, babies get chickenpox all the time, but they get a rash and a fever, and after a few days it goes away. And for her, this attacked her heart, this virus attacked it and destroyed it, and her only hope was to get a heart transplant. And we came home, and we had to make a big decision whether to list her for a new heart at all, or whether to just let her die peacefully. And we finally decided we couldn't really let her die. That was too difficult. And at the same time, we thought if we could give her a good life, no matter how many years, we would feel that that was worth it, as long as she wouldn't suffer too much. So we didn't know whether she'd live. First of all, we didn't know whether she'd ever get a new heart. We didn't know how long she'd live, if she lived a year, if she suffered a lot. We didn't know much. And I did a lot of research about this and found that people, even kids who had gotten new hearts, actually had a pretty dramatic improvement in the quality of their lives. But still, no one knew how long that was going to be. So we decided to list her. She became one of the first children in the United States to get a new heart. And we knew at that time we were riding on the wave, the front wave of something that we didn't know what was going to happen to us. We knew our lives were going to change dramatically. And we kind of hung on for the best. And she ended up needing a second heart when she was 9, and I described that in my book. That was very touch and go, as I describe in the book. But I will say that even though she then died when she was 19 years old, she was in nursing school. She had a very strong purpose in her life. She had a wonderful boyfriend. She had many, many people who loved her, and not just her family, but a lot of people. She had a lot of friends, and she had had a lot of amazing experiences. We had gone to Thailand for cooking lessons. A lot of my work takes me around the world.
And that phrase that you used, the big life,
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I think there's a big difference between how I was living before Julia got sick and how I lived after Julia got sick and after she died. I would say I was living a very average life, and I wasn't sucking the marrow from the bone of life. I was living a pretty standard Midwestern suburban life. And that's not to say it was a bad life, it was fine. But my life after Julia got sick turned into something much more powerful. The bigness of the life. Marcus Aurelius put it very well 2,000 years ago. when he said, don't live your life as if you're going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you're here, while you're alive, do good. And I felt that suddenly I was going to die. And I think we tend to ignore our deaths. I think we try to put off death. We don't want to think about it. We don't go to movies that involve death. We eschew that so much. And so death was in our face. We had no choice. And having it so salient in our lives made us think more about not death, but our lives. And that's what death does. It's interesting. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross once said, if each of us every day would think more about their own deaths, we'd have a more peaceful world. Buddhism, Buddhist monks teach that you should think about your death. And they contemplate their deaths and even their own decomposition, which I write about just a bit in my book. And we don't think about that in the society very much. And when you start thinking about that, when that is looming over you, or when your daughter is sick in this way, it makes you start thinking more about life. It's almost as if the Grim Reaper is providing a contrast to the brightness and beauty of life.
A lot of people don't know what's involved with the whole thing of having a transplant and then the subsequent care that you have to.
It's a lot. Yeah, having a heart transplant is a very, very serious decision to make, whether you even want to be listed, quite honestly. The drugs are very expensive, so you need very good health insurance. Or you could really end up having to sell your house or go bankrupt because of this. Now I think maybe this is a bit easier with Obamacare, but at least back then we had to worry about a lot of things. And then the quality of her life was very up and down. She was in the hospital a lot. She would get sick very easily. And we never knew how long she would live. So the good part about this, though, and there is a good part, and that's that it changed our lives from black and white into Technicolor. We were just living nice, normal lives, and I was striving to get tenure, and I was quite successful, I think, as an academic, and I was moving forward with no problem really, and I thought, oh good, I'll just golf a lot, that sort of thing. I was living this life that was going to do my thing, put in my work, but at the same time, focus on things like golf or tennis or whatever I enjoyed, maybe some travel. But when Julia got sick, it changed our lives forever. And we started living every day as if that day might be our last. And in doing so, we started living bigger lives. It wasn't just her life that became bigger. Like, we really did a lot of things with Julia, but our own lives, we started realizing, wow, do we want to go to our graves with our headstone reading the number of frequent flyer miles I have, or the amount of NIH funding I've gotten, or whatever. I just didn't view that as all that important. The number of journal articles that I've written is not that important to me, quite honestly. What other people think about me is not that important. What I think about me turns out to be extraordinarily important.
One of the things I noticed throughout the book is your ability to listen and respond.
Well, thank you.
And that's it also in terms of your daughter, because there's an ongoing pattern which she would reemerge in your life.
Yeah.
But you didn't dismiss it. You listened and then responded.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I do feel my daughter still really lives in me, and I don't know how to explain that any more scientifically than that, but I do listen to her. I try to listen to my heart and respond to that. I don't know what else to say about that. I don't know what else to say about that.
She seems to appear at significant points.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, it's funny. I actually did. I write about this just a bit. I asked this Hindu guru in northern India about my meditation. That when I meditate and close my eyes and I'm deep in meditation, I see her eyes, and they're very, very alive. and they're literally blinking, and they're looking at me, and I kind of see her very, very directly. And it's not my eyes. I thought, oh, maybe this is a reflection of my own eyes. It's not. It's very clearly her. And I'm seeing this, and I said, what is that? Is she still in some way, is this a portal somewhere? Is she somewhere else? He said, no, I don't think so. I really think she lives in you, and she'll live in you as long as you let her. So.
Coexisting.
Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned in the book, you're the Professional Director for Innovation and Social Entrepreneurship.
Yes.
At the University of Michigan School of Public Health. But the Northwestern University psychologists Edith Chen and Greg Miller, and their model called Shift and Persist.
Yeah. It's a fascinating model of resilience. It's how people, I think the basic elements of Shift and Persist are people who go through very difficult times, if they worry too much about all the stressors in their lives, and we do that so often now. We try to control our lives. We try to control the stresses. And that turns out to be a bit like trying to swim in quicksand and get out of it. The more you struggle in quicksand to get out, the more you sink. And I think that this idea of persisting means that you're very committed. You become committed to a purpose, to a deep goal, a goal that you deeply value, and you keep pursuing that in the face of this kind of stress. And it's not just Shift and Persist, but there are other therapies, one called ACT, or Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, where you're very focused on the commitment toward a goal or a purpose in your life. And just like in meditation, where in meditation you start focusing on your breathing, or you focus on a mantra or word, and in that type of focused meditation, what invariably happens is that thoughts arise. Thoughts about the past, oh, why didn't I do that? Or thoughts about the future, oh, I have to go here, or I have to do this. And our heads are cluttered with that. And you don't try to fight that, because the more you fight it, it's like, struggling in quicksand. But if you simply allow these thoughts to enter in your mind and allow them to just percolate up, and you just return to your mantra or return to your breathing, you move deeper and deeper and deeper into your meditation. It's very similar to how one can live their life, I believe. That when you stop worrying about these stressors, if you allow the stressors to basically percolate up, these things will happen. If you keep trying to fight every one of these, battle back, always boxing every stressor that comes up. If I get a bad review on my book, or somebody writes something negative, or somebody says something, if I keep trying to battle back all the time, that's all I'll be doing. If I keep focusing instead on a goal, saying, well, I need to continue working toward this goal, that's what I really care about. Those things kind of percolate up, and they go away, and you're more deeply then focused on this mission that you have.
Well, and in this era of the post-stress traumatic syndrome, it seemed like it offered a way through the maze. Because there's some statistics that you had mentioned about the value of how you handle the stress.
People with PTSD, very often one of the biggest moderators, I'll go back to Gulf War veterans. Over 80% of people soldiers who go to the Gulf War see horrible things, dead people or blown up people or whatever, or they themselves get parts blown up. And then they come back, and if they can't repurpose their lives and create new purpose in their lives, that's when they tend to suffer PTSD. And the same can be said about people going through illness, the loss of a loved one, earthquakes, natural disasters. When bad things happen, if you're not able to repurpose your life in some way, that's when difficult things happen. It's funny you mentioned that. Last month I was on the USS Carrier Midway in San Diego, and I was speaking to veterans from the VA, as well as many soldiers, and about purpose in life, and about my book. And this seemed to resonate greatly with them. They understood this, they get it. and they understand what happens when you can't repurpose your life, or when you're somehow unable to, or don't really think about that. It's very important.
Well, I have a lot of students who are coming back, who are suffering post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
And it's very, very difficult. Part of it, I think, is reflective things like journals, getting therapy, but they really have the big struggle.
I think artistic expression is important too, Jim. You're kind of suggesting that. I know for me, when my daughter died, I was suffering from post-traumatic stress, and my 2 books that I wrote have really been trauma narratives, in part. They've been the narrative that I needed to write. They had to come out of me. And especially my first book, On Purpose, which is this graphic novel, I thought about this whole story of my life so vividly that I thought words would not accomplish this. I thought about a movie, and then you didn't know how to do that, of course. And then I thought, maybe I'll just write this as a graphic novel. And so I decided to try that, and it was really fun. And it was very therapeutic for me. And also it's helped me help other people. Helping other people, both from teaching, just generally teaching my students, as well as helping other people who have gone through difficult times, is incredibly therapeutic, and I regard it as a blessing.
There was one phrase that really struck me as I read the book, breaking open.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I've totally digested what you meant by that and what the discussion was,
Yeah.
but it seemed like that's where it's struggling to make sense out of what's going on.
Just a month after my daughter died, somebody handed me, I can't remember whom, unfortunately, somebody handed me a book called Broken Open. And it was by a woman named Elizabeth Lesser, and Elizabeth Lesser runs the Omega Institute. And it was the first book that deeply touched me and changed me and helped me. Of all the things I was searching for and trying to read, that was the first book I read that really helped me. Later I got into existential philosophy and poetry and various things, but this book talked about how we are surrounded by an ego. And I think about an ego almost like a castle wall. And this ego is pretty thick. It defends, it's almost a psychological immune system for us. So if somebody says, you need to quit smoking, or you need to work out more, you need to do this, you need to change, it's this wall and bounces back, of course. And now with television focused so much on, we can watch MSNBC and it focuses on one political party, or Fox News and it focuses on another political party. We can live within this castle wall now more and more easily. Whereas I'm sure you and I remember Walter Cronkite and other people in the 1960s and 70s, and they might go to Vietnam and come back and go, well, I don't know if this war is making sense anymore. And we all watched from the right and left, and most of us said, yeah, maybe this isn't a good idea anymore. And if it ever was. But we thought in a little more cohesive way, and we saw both sides of stories, and now we can just live within this castle wall. And so I think about this castle wall being the ego, and the Buddha talked about the ego, every philosophy talks about the ego, and psychology talks about it, and one way to get through it is, what I think is to open the castle drawbridge. Every once in a while, if you're very right-wing, watch MSNBC. Every once in a while, if you're very left-wing, watch Fox News. Just under heavily armed guard, Then, frog march them out if you want, that's fine. But every once in a while, open your mind to a different perspective and really try to understand that perspective. We always say at Thanksgiving, oh, well, Uncle Joe is coming. And Uncle Joe doesn't agree with us politically, so don't bring up politics. I always bring up politics. Say, let's talk about this, and let's see if we can have a wonderful meal at the same time. Then we'll all have grown from this. And maybe we can even come up with some values that we all care about. We transcend, we rise above our castle wall, and start thinking about things bigger than ourselves, bigger than our own egos. And that's a truly delightful meal then, when you're able to transcend. And another way to think about this castle wall is when it breaks open. So when horrible things happen to us, when you do lose a loved one, when you do get sick, if you get cancer, if you suffer from some major problem, if you're devastated by an earthquake or hurricane or whatever, then your ego breaks open too. Businesses can break open. You know, if a business is suddenly bankrupt, then everybody in that business turns to each other and their ego is broken and they no longer are defensive. They're going, oh, I've lost my defensiveness. I'm willing to try new things now. I see clearly now. I see reality better. So families can break open, businesses can break open, maybe even governments can break open. I kind of wish in a way we would have a little bit of an experience. Hopefully we can transcend without breaking open. I hope so. But
Pretty thick right now.
It's so thick, and everybody in it seems so thick. Their egos are so thick. And I think that's very unfortunate, and I actually believe that's one of the purposes of purpose. If you have a self-transcending purpose, if you start thinking about things bigger than yourself, you literally are transcending your ego wall, and you're starting to see things more clearly. And that's one of the things I think we really need in our society.
One of the things I thought was fascinating with your book was using the going in the kayak as the frame, you know, at the beginning and at the end. How did you get into that?
Well, my father loved kayaking, and he's 84 now, so he doesn't kayak much anymore, but he taught me to love kayaking. And it's the one boat, it's a one water experience that I find where you really are in the water. I mean, your butt is in the water, it's under the water, and your torso is above the water. And the quiet and peace that you get from kayaking on a smooth lake, and sometimes Lake Michigan is smooth, sometimes it's like, you know, the Atlantic Ocean and it's roiling, but quite often it's smooth as glass. When you're kayaking through that, just paddling, which I was in the first chapter of my book, you feel a sense of peace, and that's when I really felt my daughter very clearly, a few months after she had died. And I was suffering a great deal. I was drinking too much, and I was eating too much, and I didn't care whether I lived or died. And I describe this experience in my book, I hope vividly, that I was really about 2 miles out into Lake Michigan, I was at a crossroads, and one side kind of said, you're not going to survive this. And it's not that I was going to kill myself, I wasn't suicidal, but I didn't care enough about my life that I knew I would die pretty soon. And I didn't care. And the other was that I'd have to change my life. And I had a choice. And I really felt that I had a choice right there. And the water, you know, metaphorically represents rebirth in almost every culture. and you know, Seneca once said, it doesn't matter how much wind is in your sails if you don't have a harbor. So you also need this direction to take. Maybe you have a current, maybe you have a wind, but...
And a place to come back to.
Yeah, this harbor to come to, yeah. And so you may need to leave where you're from and go to a new harbor. And, you know, for me at that point I kind of had to, metaphorically, go to a new harbor. At the end of the book, I tried to bookend this. And that all happened. All those things are true. So going back out on Lake Michigan 5 years later, and just thinking about how I felt then is very different. I still get sad. I still tear up. I'm not afraid of that. I used to be afraid of that, but I'm not at all.
But kayaking is a type of craft, also.
Yeah.
It's a skill.
Yeah.
Because you have to know what you're doing. If there's any boat where you really have to know what you're doing, it's a kayak.
Yeah, you don't want to flip over. Right. Yeah, you don't want to flip over. Yeah, you don't want to flip over. Right. Yeah, you don't want to flip over. Luckily, I have a pretty wide kayak, so I'm okay at that. But you're right, you do kind of have to know what you're doing. And the water was ice cold. It was incredibly stupid to do what I was doing, which was going way out in absolute icy cold water in my boxer shorts and a t-shirt and no life preserver, and I just went out, straight out, thinking maybe I'll just kayak. I was in northern Michigan, and you know, we always do this. I was way up here. Wisconsin's over here, here's Lake Michigan, 80 miles between the two. And I thought maybe I'll just paddle over to Green Bay, Wisconsin, which was obviously never
Lake
gonna
Michigan
happen.
is a very dangerous place.
It's a horribly dangerous lake.
You know why? It's because it's narrow. And so the waves are very
Interesting.
intense.
And they come up fast.
That's why. It's because they come up fast.
It can be very smooth, and then suddenly,
Yes.
boom. Last year, unfortunately, a child died nearby us, and the father and son were kayaking back from one of the islands, the Manitou Islands, and the father was an expert kayaker and done this before, really knew what he was doing, and yet they ended up, he lost his son. It is a very dangerous lake.
I read a book on Great Lakes shipwrecks,
Oh, yeah.
and captains who steer ships on the oceans have a lot of trouble with the Great Lakes
Really? I didn't know
because
that.
the wave pattern is so much different, and you have to plan much differently.
Yeah.
And if you get the wrong position, you're going down.
The periodicity of the waves is much shorter, so when you hear the waves lap up on the shore in the Pacific Ocean, they go. It's about 2 or 3 times that rate in
Yeah.
Lake Michigan. So I imagine these waves kind of pop up and pop up and pop. I don't know, but
Yeah, and very strong. And they can take you
Huge.
down. In Lake Superior,
Huge.
the legend is it doesn't give up the boat because it's so cold. It just takes it right down.
Yeah. Well,
I thought that it was not impossible to have had that happen to me at that point in time. It was not a smart idea, but I didn't care. I just really didn't care.
That's one of those aspects of when you do something and it's more of an irrational impulse and you're not thinking, and that's a very dangerous place to be. But fortunately, it came out of it.
Very fortunate, and I'm very fortunate in many ways, Jim.
And then at the end of the book, you come back. Well, thank you for being on Ripcraft.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jim Schaefer, the host and executive producer of Riprap, the academic book television program. And what I'd like to do right now is to share with you how our unique and historic television series can use academic research to bring exciting, vital insights into important topics that affect our everyday lives. What kinds of topics? The politics and other dynamics that produce the gasoline from foreign countries for gasoline in the cars we drive. The way we care for ourselves and our family. Our sense of fashion. The ways we are attracted to other people. The media we use. And the ways that the media use us and shape our lives and what we think about and even what we remember and dream about. Plus the quality of food we eat, the music we listen to. So, who are we? First, let me explain our name. We quickly decided that we needed a one-word title, like many of the popular television programs that were being broadcast as we started up.